Welcome to the EcoParent Podcast Network. I'm Sam, the founder of EcoParent magazine. My partner Alexis and I had zero experience in the publishing industry, no money, and a new baby. But we quit our jobs, leapt into the unknown, and started EcoParent magazine anyway. It was absolutely freaking terrifying. But at the same time, it felt right. Just a few years into the journey, Alexis was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer that later found its way to her brain. It was utter chaos, navigating treatment schedules, caring for a 3-year-old, and trying to run a fledgling business, not to mention the general emotional havoc. Alexis didn't make it, but the rest of us did, and I've spent the years since raising a wonderful son and building EcoParent into North America's top print magazine for conscientious families. Even 10 years in, we're still a very small crew. If you send an email, it's probably me that will answer you. And this podcast network is a monumental step for us, another leap into the unknown. But like before, it just feels right. And I know that Alexis would agree that the podcasting team I've assembled here is an incredible group of people whose only goal is to inspire the best in you. Okay, I'm going to shut up now and let you listen to the podcast. Thank you so much for stopping by. You're the reason we do what we do.
Hello, Dori.
Hi, Natalie.
Welcome to the Beyond Beautiful Birth podcast. I am Natalie Tregaskiss. Dori, I'm wondering if you could start before we introduce ourselves, if you could talk a little bit about the naming of the episode and how we came up with Beyond Beautiful Birth.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Dori Sky-Engel, and we talked a lot about different names and what we wanted the name to convey in this podcast. And we settled on Beyond Beautiful Birth because birth is beyond beautiful. Obviously, it's beautiful. It's bringing life into the world, but it's also messy and complicated and can come in so many forms. So we wanted to sort of convey that in the title, that it's beyond the beauty of birth, but also beyond birth, right? We're not just going to be talking about birth, but pregnancy and postpartum and parenting and all the intricacies of, bringing life into the world.
I mean, we know each other, obviously, but I'm wondering if you could tell me a bit about how you came to birth work. What's your story?
So it's funny. I was in theater before, in a previous form of this life. I was in theater, and I always did children's theater. So I always worked with kids. And before going to theater school, when I was like 19 and applying to schools, I actually applied to midwifery at the time. And I had no experience in birth world at all. Or I was in the process of applying to midwifery, but I got accepted to theater school first, and then I didn't have to write my midwifery school entrance essays. So I was like, well, I guess that's the way it's going to go then. And then I was in theater for the next however many years, and then I stopped doing theater and I got into catering. So I was working with food and nutrition and making personal prepared meals for people, and I was doing a lot of research into food and how it relates to how it makes your body feel and how it relates to any symptoms you might have or illness you might have. And then I started having babies. And my first baby was such a wonderful, beautiful home birth. And I think I got introduced to home birth from a friend of mine who had had a birth previously, but the home birth was just like the be all and end all for me. It was amazing. I was one of the first of my friends to have babies, so I kind of became that person that people would ask about birth and pregnancy and all those kind of things. And I'm kind of a researcher at heart anyways. So I got really into that and then had another baby. And then I went to medical school after that. So sort of a roundabout way getting into medical school. But as soon as I went to naturopathic college, I knew that I would have to be working with babies and pregnant women because I could just talk about pregnancy and babies and birth all day long. It's like I never tire of it. And I think that it's so important to really discuss all of those like secretive corners of the topic to really get it out in the open, because there's really none of it should be secretive. It should all be out there being discussed all the time.
So you're a naturopathic doctor, and while you were doing your training, you knew you wanted to focus on babies and pregnancy and birth and postpartum. At what point did you decide you wanted to attend births? Because you're a doula as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess in conversation with my husband, who was present at my birth, I realized that his experience in the room was so different than mine, obviously. But it kind of made me jealous, even though I loved being the birthing person. I was like, oh, I want to like experience that awe as well. So that was like a natural progression for me. And I also find I have 3 children, 3 boys, and I do find living with 4 boys altogether, it is a lot of masculine energy going on in my life, a lot. So to balance that out with kind of the divine feminine presence that is apparent in a birthing room, like there is nothing more powerfully feminine than bringing life into the world. So that gives me a real balance in my life personally. That was always a natural progression for me of babies and pregnancy and birth. And it's just wonderful.
Yeah, amazing. Do you remember the first birth you attended?
I do, yes. She was really sure about what she wanted. She really wanted a natural birth. She was in a hospital. She advocated so hard for herself because she was quite post-dates. Like she was close to 42 weeks and they were throwing every intervention at her. And we kind of talked through everything and weighed the options and the pros and cons until finally she went into labor on her own. I think she was like maybe 12 days post-dates. And her mom was there and her 2 sisters were there and her partner was there. And she was so in the zone. My goodness. Yeah. And it was like, it was not easy. Like no births are super easy, you know, but she was so surrounded by all that support. And she was the first of her sisters to have a baby. And they were just, I remember just looking at their faces, just being like, oh my gosh, our sister is so powerful. How is she even tapping into this? How is she doing this? And then when it was over, I was also joyous and everyone was so happy to kind of bring that baby into the world. And the mama was like so in the zone that it didn't matter who was there, you know, like she had just blocked everything out and it didn't matter. And it was almost like they were just observing like birth in the wild in a hospital. That was pre-COVID times, obviously, when you could just pack the birthing room full of people and spectators. It's a little different now, but that was like, oh yeah, this work is for me. This is definitely what I like doing. It was just confirmation for me, for sure.
So maybe I've wondered this and haven't asked you it before, but how do you balance all of this? So you're a naturopathic doctor, you have a busy active practice, and you still attend births. And you've just described that you're the mama of 3 boys. So tell me a bit about the structure of your week. Like how much time are you in clinic? How much time would you be attending births? What does your life look like kind of on the daily?
Yeah, it's a lot of hoping. It's a lot of hoping it all works out, honestly. I don't know that I've got it figured out or anything, but I do have 3 days a week where I'm in clinic. So 3 full days a week where those are my dedicated clinic days. And I see patients those days, either virtually or in person, whatever people prefer, out of 2 different locations in Toronto. Sometimes babies are born on those days, you know, we never know when the babies are going to come. So my patients all know that that's part of the work that I do and that they might be rescheduled. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but sometimes it happens. And usually people are pretty understanding about that. The other 2 days a week, I catch up on everything else. So like sometimes doing doula patients at that time, not seeing them in person, but sort of catching up on everything else and taking care of my family and my house and all the other things that go with it. You know, I've always been kind of a work hard, play hard person. You know, when my husband and I first got together, we would work for 6 months and then travel for 6 months, just save up all our money for 6 months and then put everything in storage, rent out our apartment or whatever and go travel, because that was always just when you want to relax, you want to like fully relax, you know, and it's great to get away for a night or a weekend, certainly. But especially when doing birth work, when it's just full on, you know, there are months when I just don't turn off my phone any night because I'm on call all the time. So in order to really shut down, I have to not be on call. I have to like leave the country, turn the phone off, like do something like that. And then I can be fully present in relaxation mode. So that's kind of always been the way that I operate even before this. So it blends well. And some weeks, some months are really overwhelming. And it just feels like, how's it all going to get done? But somehow we hope and we cross our fingers and, you know, the timing all works out. I would say most of the time, like 98% of the time, it's like somehow the flow just works.
Yeah.
But like any working mom, like balance is tough. And there are times when it's harder and times when it seems to flow.
And I'm sure your clinical work probably informs your parenting, and your parenting informs your clinical work, right? And I think that's really an interesting thing that a lot of birth workers who have also given birth, it's interesting to kind of see those intersections. So you've got 3 boys. Tell me how old they are. And maybe if you could tell me a bit about kind of each birth and how they were the same or different from each other.
Okay. My eldest is 16, and he was the home birth that I mentioned previously. I knew I wanted a midwife. I had a midwife follow me all the way through. It was a very uncomplicated pregnancy. I was humongous, like very, very large, like people stopping me in the streets at 6 months saying, "Are you due any day now?" or having twins or, something like that. I did go into labor on my own, I think 8 days post dates. And it was a challenging labor. Like I labored at home. I labored in the tub for a while. The midwives came and checked me. They broke my water, which I remember them giving me the option of, do you want your water broken? And I was like, what are the pros and cons here? And the pros were things will get moving and, you might have this baby faster. The cons are it's going to get more intense. And I was like, wait, what? It's so intense already. What do you mean it's going to get more intense? And then obviously if there's any meconium in the water, then you have to transfer to the hospital. So we broke the water. It absolutely got more intense. I was ready to start pushing pretty quickly. And the pushing was super challenging. And I remember people telling me, oh, the pushing is the best part. That's when you feel the relief and you feel like you're actually proactively doing something. And that was not my favorite part. I will be honest. That was like the hardest part. I felt like I didn't know where I was pushing or where I was supposed to push or if I was doing it right. And they would have me change positions. And I remember one position I got into, they were like, really had to convince me to get into this position. 3 people had to move me. And then I got into it and it was like excruciating. I was like, no, put me back on my back or wherever I was, So you just never know. You have in your head like, oh, being on your back with your legs up is the worst. And sometimes it's the best. You never know. It's just about letting yourself explore which one works for you. So eventually that baby started coming out, but he was quite stubborn on the way out. And there was a moment after he was out where he didn't take a breath right away. And he was kind of like ashen and kind of gray blue. And the midwife said, okay, we're going to have to take your baby. And then he just took a breath. And I so vividly remember seeing that breath of life spread through his blue body. And like it started with a little pink around his heart. And he's his skin is very, very, very white. He's like a redhead. He's translucent. You could see like the blood fill his heart. And then you could see this like pink start to spread through his chest and into his limbs eventually. And his whole face got red and he was crying. And it was kind of wild, like seeing that full breath of life get into his body. He was a very large baby with a very large placenta, and I had a very large bleed to go with that. So I actually couldn't hold him right away because the midwives needed to deal with the gush of blood that was occurring in the bedroom. And they dealt with it great. They set up a little portable IV and gave me all the medications that I needed. And it was like, there was no worries. But I remember not being able to see the baby because I wear glasses and I wasn't wearing my glasses and I couldn't see his face. And my husband was just like standing in the doorway holding him. And I was trying to see him and I had my arms all around the bed trying to find my glasses, which I couldn't find. And then I found our old digital camera, pre-iPhones, people found the digital camera and I was like zooming in to try and see his little face for the first time. And, it was only a few minutes and then he was able to be on my chest, but it was intense. And it wasn't like, I say it was like a beautiful birth, which it was, but it was also like, there were some scary parts and there was some messy parts and there was some very hard parts and very empowering parts and all the things. And, we didn't tell our families that we were planning to give birth at home because there was a lot of fear and a lot of like unknown around that. And it was sort of the phone call afterwards that was like, we never really made it to the hospital. So if you want to come meet the baby, like come to the house. So there's everybody's fears and worries and expectations around that. That's part of the birth, but that definitely started me off on the empowered birth journey. I would say it was just, I felt so supported by my midwives and my partner and my house and the whole experience. Even having that hemorrhage afterwards was proof that they can take care of it. These things are totally manageable, and it's what they are trained for, midwives being experts in all kinds of birth, because what birth is textbook? What birth is exactly how you think it's going to go? Just like all people are so different, all births are so different.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. You know that.
I know that firsthand.
You know
yes.
that as a midwife. So let's talk about you a little bit.
Okay.
Tell me how you came about into the birth work. What led you to this wild and wonderful journey?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of an organic start like yours and kind of a windy road too. I think that when I look back at that, I always remember being obsessed with babies. That was just always my thing. My parents told me my first word was baby. I always played with my baby dolls. Everything was about having a baby, breastfeeding my baby, putting baby in a little carrier. I just loved babies from the moment I can remember. And as I kind of got older and started thinking about what do you want to be when you grow up, which is that question that everyone asks you, I don't think I really knew, and I also didn't really have words for it. And so my first memory of describing what I wanted to be when I grew up was I either wanted to be Jane Goodall, and I think that's because baby chimpanzees are just so cute.
So cute.
Or an obstetrician, right? So the word that I had for someone who catches babies was an obstetrician. I just knew I wanted to be in the birth world from, and that would have been around 10 when I was sort of defining what I wanted to be when I grow up. And then as I worked my way through sort of teenage years and got to the end of high school and was starting to decide, I lost some focus a little bit and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do and knew I should go to university. It felt like, okay, the next step after high school is you go to university. And I never really questioned that, but I don't think I had enough foresight to sort of make the plans to move in a really proactive direction, toward birth work. And so I remember sitting with my guidance counselor and them saying, you're really good with people. Why don't you do a psychology degree? And I was like, okay. And that's how that happened. So I stayed in my hometown and I did a psychology degree. And once I finished that up, was growing to become an adult at this time. I was probably around 21 or something and was like, okay, now I definitely want to focus on birth work. We had kind of inverse stories. It's funny, but at the time I was like, okay, I want to become a doula. And I decided to start some of that training and did some of the coursework. And as I was doing that, was also exploring what do I want to do beyond this degree that we all know that there's not much that we can do with a bachelor's degree these days. So when I was done, I was like, I have to do the next thing. And so at the time, I looked into midwifery as well as nursing and thought to myself, nursing is broad. It's broader. And there were some other kind of interests that I have that I thought I could maybe hit with nursing that I couldn't with midwifery, such as teen health, sexual health. And now I know that midwifery can cover all of those things. But at the time, I was sort of like, I'm not quite sure exactly where I want to focus. So maybe I'll start with nursing and keep it really broad. And so that's where I started. So I did my nursing degree, but really went through that 4-year program knowing I want to work with babies and birth. And so, it's a generalist training, but I had a real specialist desire and approach. So as you get to your final placement of nursing, you get to sort of focus on where you want to spend your time. And I did my last placement or my consolidation placement in postpartum and labor and birth. And so I'd finally, got through the 3.5 years and got to the end and was able to do birth and postpartum. And that felt really good. But I also was really alarmed by the medical model of birth. I think I was really, there was some disillusionment that happened there for me, for sure, in terms of seeing how births were managed. And I'm definitely not medical establishment. I still work within it, but it wasn't quite what I expected.
Can I ask you, what was your experience with birth prior to that? What were the stories that you grew up with?
Yeah, I love this question. And I haven't given it a lot of thought until recently. I had zero experience with birth. I had never attended a birth. I watched A Birth Story on repeat for probably 5 years because I just loved watching, folks, this is TLC, A Birth Story, which is a
Oh
show
my
that
gosh.
used to play. But when I think back about that and sort of what were my ideas around birth, I thought, obviously, it's natural to think about my mother and the stories that she told me. I definitely was raised with stories from my mom around birth being possible, that an unmedicated birth was possible, that advocating for yourself in birth was possible. My mom was an 18-year-old first-time mom who had a breech baby. And for those who don't know, that was a bum down baby. So the bum was presenting first. And at that time, that would have been 1975. And her physician said, let's do a C-section. And she said, nope, I'm going to have a vaginal delivery, unmedicated.
Wow.
An 18-year-old advocating for that and just saying, no, my body can do this. And she did do it.
Wow, good for her.
Yeah. So that was my sister. And then I followed, which was a 2-hour, very quick, precipitous birth at 37 weeks. And then my brother, who is 9 pounds, 1 ounce, which she felt was a huge baby. Mine ended up being bigger than that. But, my brother, the notorious third, who was quite big, also without any issues or any complications or any medication. And so I think, and breastfeeding too, like to follow that through just around beyond the birth. My mom breastfed all of us, was passionate about breastfeeding, really had a natural approach to birth and parenting. And so I think that did come through. Like, I think that's a really good question that you asked, and one that I don't really factor into the way that I came to birth, but I think it probably did lay the groundwork in terms of my belief in birth.
Totally. And I wonder if you know where your mom's confidence came from as like an 18-year-old first-time pregnant woman.
Other than her being a true hippie and believing natural was the way for everything.
Mm-hmm.
My mom made her own yogurt, which again, at the time, she just believed in her body and that things should be natural and not fussed with. And
amazing.
I don't know where she got that from, but that's a good follow-up question that I should bring to her.
Yeah, that seems like maybe it's just innate in both of you, just like true belief in your body, which is sometimes a hard thing to teach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I came to, after nursing and doing the postpartum and the labor and delivery nursing, and my first job was doing those roles. Similar story to you. I got pregnant 2 or 3 years into being a nurse, and I chose midwifery care for that pregnancy. And that was it for me. Once I saw midwifery care and all of the pregnancy care, but even beyond that, I think the birth really was such a powerful moment for me. And then the postpartum care that I received in midwifery care was life-changing. And when I had that care, I just couldn't believe that you could do it any other way. I was like, this is the way. And so, kind of like you, my own birth really solidified the fact that I wanted to become a midwife. So I started planning for that and thinking about how am I going to do this. I went back to nursing after my maternity leave. I had another baby. And at the same time that I was kind of ready, once I had my 2 children, they opened up a 2-year post-bac program at Ryerson here in Toronto, so that somebody with a training in some other bachelor's degree, mostly with a health focus, but not necessarily at the time, could do the midwifery program in 6 consecutive semesters. So you do it it's a 4-year program typically, but this was sort of condensed into 6 consecutive semesters, and you do it in 2 full calendar years without breaks. And so I was the first and only person actually to go through that initial program as they conceived it. And it was really successful for me. I was really happy to be able to do it in that amount of time. I think because of my labor and delivery experience, it was, of course, all midwifery training is difficult, but it was manageable for me, and I was happy to do it in that way. And so I've since then worked in many different worlds, but use both. I am still a registered nurse and a registered midwife, and work using both of those hats. And most recently this year have also become a board certified lactation consultant. So that was really exciting for me. And I sort of use all of those hats along with, my parenting hat to inform the kind of care that I give.
Amazing. It's always so interesting, all the ways that we come to this place. I think about that a lot. And it's something that I remember thinking about when I was so post dates with my first, of just like, okay, this is how everybody comes into this world. This is how it's done. Everybody has to go through this, And I so distinctly remember like walking around looking at people with children or pregnant or whatever and just being like, everybody's got to go through this, How are we going to do this? So to have that drive to support that process, I think is such an innate thing, because if you don't love it, it's really not worth it. Like why would you do it if you don't love it?
For sure. For sure.
So I see that. I hear that love of the process from you, and that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah. A lot of people, you'll hear it be called a calling, right? Birth work being a calling, because it is, like you said, people don't just stumble upon it. Like, when they're looking in the manual for like, oh, I could do this degree or this degree or this degree. It's not usually like, oh, I like people, I'm going to do a psychology degree, right? Birth work is usually really a specific thing that you've been called to do. It's been in your mind for long periods of time that, and it is hard work. It's something that you're often really called to do. And that's what drives you to continue to do it despite it being so difficult.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So should we talk a little bit about what we're doing here with this podcast?
Let's.
Yeah. So this podcast, Beyond Beautiful Birth, is part of the Eco Parent Network. And there's a few different podcasts under the Eco Parent Network umbrella. And this one is meant to focus specifically on pregnancy, labor, delivery, and the early postpartum period, which really encompasses a lot. And our hope is that we're going to be able to bring on, we've already got a few lined up, some amazing guests with different perspectives than ours and different areas of expertise. We'll talk about all the ins and outs of birth.
We have a couple questions that we were thinking we want to ask most of our guests. I'm hoping I can ask you one of them. So I love thinking about this, but what was the one thing that no one ever told you about either birth or pregnancy or parenting that you wish you knew beforehand?
I think about this a lot because I worked with kids so much. I worked in daycares and I worked in children's homes and I worked with kids so much. I felt like I was prepared for a lot. I was prepared for sleep deprivation. Everybody talks about that, right? You're not going to sleep for the first year. I was totally 100% prepared for that. I was prepared for the messiness and the grossness of like fluids coming out of every hole all the time and having to clean all that up. That was fine. That was no problem. It's that when you have your own child, you feel their pain in a way that is like so different. It's just not the same, no matter how much you care for, the kids in your daycare or as a teacher or when you're babysitting or whatever, And I remember the first time my eldest had his like feelings hurt. He was like 2-3 years old and he always loved balls, basketballs, soccer balls, baseballs, whatever. He was really sporty, little innately sporty kid. And we were at the park and there was like some big teenage kids who are now like his size, what he is now. And they were playing basketball and he like toddled over to them and he was like, I play too. And they were like, no. And he was crushed and I was crushed. And obviously these teenagers don't need to play with this little toddler there. Like they don't owe him anything. And he was interrupting their game. But I just remember seeing the like distress in his face and feeling it in my body. And I've had that so many times since then. But that is something that I was so unprepared for, is that feeling of, yeah, your heart now lives outside of your body and there's nothing you can do to protect it, right?
Yep.
You can create a little bit of scaffolding and you can try and set up, but truly like when they are hurting, you feel it in a way that is like so deep to your core. And it's just such a different feeling than anything I had ever experienced before. And that was absolutely shocking to me and continues to be.
Yeah, it is shocking. And I think on my own parenting journey, I mean, my children are 15, 13, and 5. So this, I'm fairly deep into the journey and I'm still learning things every day. And I would say the thing that I'm really being aware of and thinking about right now or focusing on is being okay with my children not being okay, right? Mm-hmm. So to your point around, you feel their pain. And it's really hard not to internalize that and then make it want to go away, right? Because most of us have been socialized to not want to feel pain, to avoid pain, to work our way toward happiness, joy, all the good ones,
Totally.
and avoid fear, pain, hurt. And the thing I'm really trying to hold space for, both for myself and therefore my children, is all of the feelings, right? All the feels, right? That we actually need to feel all of them. And it is so hard. I still catch myself. The other day, my daughter was saying something that was hurting her. And I immediately went to, how do I distract her out of this? So she had just gone on a trip. The trip was over. She was sad about it. And I said, oh, but you have this trip coming up in this, you've got this new trip coming up in April. You can start looking forward to that one. And I caught myself immediately and was like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's okay to be sad that this trip is over. It is sad. You were looking forward to it and now it's over. And let's not move forward to being excited about the next thing. Let's feel the disappointment about this being lost, right? And
Totally.
so, yeah, this, it's interesting, right? Like how we learn to parent ourselves through parenting our children.
Mm-hmm. It's also that thing of like, you can't really experience the fullness of the joy of the trip if you don't experience the sadness also of like the loss of it.
Exactly.
Like opening yourself up to the love of having a child is opening yourself up to the possibility of pain too, right? And you can't have one without the other. That's kind of the exquisite beauty of life.
Totally. And I think something I learned much later in my parenting journey. So, as we talk about that fourth trimester or sort of those first couple months postpartum and sort of what do we wish we knew, I think that would be one of them for sure. And also, the other thing that I think came true for me really strongly was two things, actually, to listen to your own voice, right, as a parent. So when I think about what do I wish somebody said to me before I became a parent, and of course, you have to learn, you can't be told this, you have to learn it in your own way. I did the typical first mom things when I had my first child. I read every single book. I Googled everything. I just was like, what am I supposed to do about sleep? Where's the expert who is going to tell me the thing that I need to do? And it was really in finding parents that were like-minded, that did things in the way that I did as well, where I was able to really find my authentic parenting voice, right? And I think I wish I knew that a little bit ahead of time, that no one else knows what's best for you and your body and your baby. And you are the expert on your own baby. And I make sure I say that to my clients or patients, right? Like, you are the expert on your own baby. Even if I'm giving, if there is a clinical call for me to give an opinion or a recommendation, I will always give the caveat, but you are the expert on your own baby. And you need to, take all the pieces. That's part of informed choice, right? I'm going to provide you with the risk benefits alternatives, but then what about your gut? What's your gut telling you, right? And I think I wish I knew a little bit more about your gut knows. Sit with yourself. Your instincts are good. Follow those natural instincts around what you think your baby needs instead of reading the book.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And then the one other really kind of poignant thing that was kind of a life change, it's probably less about parenting than it is about just individual growth. But at about 6 weeks postpartum after my first child, I made the realization that my parents were just humans. Sounds like a simple thing, right? But I think we have all these expectations around our parents, and they should know things and they should do all the right things and then when you become a parent, you realize you're just a fumbly, messy human as well, working your way through and trying to figure out how to do it. And also being a evolving human, just, you can't really take yourself out of parenting, but if as an individual, we're growing for our whole lives, right? So we're not a fully formed, evolved human when we just because we've given birth. And so figuring out how to have humility around that, honor your own growth, have compassion for your own growth. And yeah, also I think just in terms of my own healing around holding my parents in that lens too, right? That they're just humans figuring out their way too.
Totally. I love that. And also, like, my parents were also really young when they had me, and it's like a totally different life stage than when you have children, maybe when you're 30 than when you're 18 or 20.
Mm-hmm.
Really yourself growing up with your kid. I love that. I also tell all of my clients and patients like to trust their gut, and that, you know, there are experts in pediatrics and, you know, obstetrics and all those kind of things, but truly you are the best judge of where to go to get help for your child if that is what's needed. You know, like if you think something is off with your kid, don't let any doctor say, no, they're fine.
For sure.
And if you think your kid is fine, like maybe listen to yourself for a little bit, you know, and really tune into that. But I think there is this element of like overriding our own natural instincts. And that's something that has to be reminded, that humanity would not have survived this long if we didn't trust our instincts. So yeah, we have a lot of really flashy, awesome tools to help us now, you know, and like vibrating mattresses in the crib to tell you when you whatever. But really, does that actually replace your instinct? No, it does not. It can enhance and it can support and it can help. And there's nothing wrong with all of the whistles and bells, but your gut is your gut. And that is just continues to develop over time. Oh my gosh, I wonder if it's going to take until my kids are parents until they like have compassion for us.
Yeah,
My
I
goodness.
think so.
Oh my goodness. What a journey that is. Goodness.
One other thing around kind of our title and thinking about beyond beautiful birth, I think I really love that it's almost a double or triple meaning, right? So like you said at the beginning, it's beyond beautiful, meaning it is magical and amazing. But then it's also beyond it being beautiful, right? So all that messiness and all of that. But then also beyond the birth being really some of the meaty part of what we want to talk about, right? And so I hope we can talk a lot about pregnancy and what it's like to grow a human in your body and all of those experiences. And then, of course, the birthing process and how that can vary substantially. Like, we haven't gotten into the kind of intricacies of how our births are different. But I think just the fact that every birth can be different, and that, you know, when we thought about how to talk about this, I think I struggled a little bit because I want to make sure that we're not just celebrating one type of birth, right? That all births are beautiful and we can find our way in all of them and we can feel empowered in all of them. But then also, so beyond the birth as well, which is some of the stuff I love talking about the most, which is becoming a parent, transitioning to a parent, and what all of that is like. So the other thing I really hope that we can talk a lot about is around that precious first 3 months after having a baby, right? And not only for your first, but how it differs every time, right? When you already have a toddler potentially at home, and what kind of support do we need as the parent during that time period, right? We talk a lot about, you know, a lot of childbirth education is around the pregnancy and around the birth. And then it's kind of like, go on your merry way and be a parent after that. And so back to the beyond beautiful birth, I think, you know, a lot of that stuff that I really love talking about is what happens beyond the birth. And one of the things I wish I knew as well, there's clearly a lot of things I wish I knew, is around creating that nest postpartum, right? And I talk about that a lot with my patients around how do we nourish ourselves? How do we nourish our relationships in that time period, right? Back to our point around finding your way as a parent. The way that we do that is if we are really resourced, if we are really nourished, right? And so I think not only talking about baby stuff, and obviously we both love babies and want to talk all about that, but also talking about how to nourish the parent, right? I think that's going to be really important.
Totally. That fourth trimester is so, so important. Love that. So between us and our 6 children and a nursing degree, a midwifery degree, a naturopathic degree, lactation consultant, lots of births under our belts. We've got lots of insight and lots of knowledge to share and so much to learn ourselves, which is why we're going to bring those other guests on. And can't wait to talk to everyone about all the things. It's like a never-ending wellspring of discussion points when it comes to pregnancy, birth, and beyond.
Yes, amazing. Well, I'm so excited. I'm excited we've started. I can't wait for episode 2 and having our first guest on. Talk to you soon.
So, if you listen to podcasts or watch YouTube, you've probably heard it 1,000 times before. The plea to subscribe and leave a review or a comment. Well, here we are again. But seriously, the review is especially important to us, as it has a huge impact on our discoverability amongst the zillions of podcasts all competing for your attention. So please consider leaving a review. And heck, we'd really love to hear your feedback. This pilot episode of the EcoParent Podcast Network was made possible with the generous support of Ontario Creates. Thanks for listening.